Hi there, this is Jaime with the Arts Calling Podcast, the podcast where I interview hardworking independent creatives in the literary, visual, and performing arts. As I mentioned before, there won't be any shout-outs this holiday season, but please stay tuned for more of those coming in 2024. So let's get things rolling. Today, I am thrilled to be Arts Calling author Hilary Zaid. Here's a little bit about our guest. Hilary Zaid has been a Tennessee Williams Scholar at the Sewanee Writers Conference, a James D. Houston Fellow at the Community of Writers, and two-time attendee of Tin House Writers Workshop. Her work has appeared in Mother Jones, Ecotone, Day One, the Southwest Review, and the Utne Reader, and elsewhere. Longlisted for the 2018 Northern California Independent Booksellers Award for Fiction, her novel, Paper is White, is a 2018 Foreword Indies Silver Medalist and the winner of the 2018 Independent Publishers Book Awards in LGBT Fiction. Her novel, Forget I Told You This, from Zero Street Fiction, is the inaugural winner of the Barbara DiBernard Award. Hilary holds an A.B. in English from Harvard and a Ph.D. in English from the University of California, Berkeley. Hilary has mentored aspiring writers through AWP's Writer-to-Writer Mentor Program, the Golden Crown Literary Society, and as volunteer mentor and mentor coordinator of the College Essay Mentors in the Oakland Unified School District, an equity program serving high school seniors from underserved communities. Now, this is a remarkable conversation to end the year on. 2023 was personally a blast, and I can't thank you enough for listening. I can't thank my guests enough for stopping by, and I hope that we get to enjoy more episodes in 2024 together. So with that said, I will see you in the new year, and let's give Hilary a call. Good morning. Is anybody there?
Yeah, hey, Jaime, it's Hilary.
Hi, Hilary. Good morning. How are you?
Good.
Hilary, thanks so much for your time. I know it's a little bit early over there in your neck of the woods. Where are you at these days?
I'm in Oakland, California, and because it is daylight savings time, I've been up for hours, so
Oh,
it's not
no.
even early at all.
Well, I appreciate your time. I'm really excited to chat. We got a lot to cover, but maybe if we could talk about you for a little bit, just to get to know each other just a bit might be nice.
Sure.
Are you from Oakland originally?
I'm actually a native Angelino.
Ah,
I guess not many people are native of Los Angeles, but I am. I was born and grew up there, and spent a little time on the East Coast before coming to the Bay Area for graduate school, and I've been here ever since. So since the early 90s.
so it just made sense to you. It felt like a good place to be for you?
Felt like a great place to be, and it's the place I've been longest of anywhere in my entire life. So it's definitely home at this point.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear. So let's talk about writing for a sec, because I have a feeling that you've been at this for a while. Is that right?
It is right. I was thinking about I listening to some of your other shows and thinking about the origins of my life as a writer. And I was one of these kids who carried around a little notebook.
Mm.
And I think for a lot of Gen Xers, and especially women writers and especially lesbian writers for some reason, Harriet the Spy is kind of an important figure. And she was always, of course, she got in trouble for it, but she was always walking around with her little notebook. And so I had a little notebook, and I seemed to be drawn to stories about a baby getting adopted by witches when I was 7 years old. I think that's a statement about feeling like the writer in the family. But my parents were not keen on that idea, and I remember when I was 7 saying I want to be a writer, and my mother's instinctual response was, "You can't do that. You'll starve."
I can't imagine having that kind of, well, maybe a little bit of that awareness so early on, but it seems like we just latch on to the feelings, right? Something that makes us feel so good, like whether we're bearing witness to something in our family or just the way that we see the world, we find an identifier so early on and we're like, this is me now. This is who I am. And it seems like you had that clarity very early on.
Yeah, but it's amazing how much parental discouragement can really cause you to veer away. I actually think of writing, like, I don't even think about it as having something to say, but as just having a congenital drive to make things with words. It's just like it's the thing that feels right and the thing that feels good. And of course, reading as well is it's like if I'm not reading something for a while, I'm a little off kilter. Like I definitely need to be reading something. But yeah, it took me a long time to get back to writing creatively because I did write some in high school. I was an editor on the school paper, but I always wrote satire because I just did not want to write
Mm.
the facts. There's so much work to be responsible for them. I remember my ninth grade English teacher, Mr. Quiring, if you're out there, he assigned us to write like a restaurant review kind of description thing. And it felt so burdensome that I just made up a restaurant. So it was entirely fictional. And he loved it. He didn't know. And he was like, "Where is this place? Because I want to go eat there." Like
Mm.
it's in your mind.
What
Enjoy.
beautiful validation to get. Even if, listen, I think a lot of us writers maybe just look at something and ultimately it becomes a case of, I misunderstood the assignment, but I got something better out of it. There's something way more affirming than just, filling out the sheets for a grade.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I understood the assignment. I was just cheating on it.
Yeah, and I think we come at it from two ends of the spectrum if that's the case, because I was always misunderstanding the assignment. But let's talk about the work that you've done while outside of school, because you obviously went to college for this, or you studied. You got your master's as well, and you went all the way to Ph.D. Is that correct?
Well, it actually my academic career was a detour because I
Mm,
studied English language and literature, although my father really wanted me to study business.
mm,
But I studied poetry. It wasn't a creative writing degree, and then I went on to get a PhD, also in an academic approach, studying the English Romantic poets. So that was me not writing creatively. And it was a long detour. I mean, I have an absolutely crazy article in romantic English romantic studies about a Wordsworth poem, and if you read it, you just think, "Wow, this is just utter nonsense." I mean, I took it seriously at the time, but it's just a very different way of thinking and writing that can be full of long, long words. So it really wasn't until I had my second son. I'd say when I finished graduate school, I didn't go into academia. I actually went into web development somewhat accidentally. And I had this desire and some notes to write a novel, and then I was just overwhelmed by work. And it wasn't until I had two very small children that this voice of my protagonist in my first novel, Papers White, woke up and just demanded to be heard. And I, took time that I was carving out from being with the kids to work on it. And that's how that novel came out at an excessive length that eventually became a published novel.
That's beautiful to hear. And it's funny how that happens, because you find yourself at the busiest time that you will ever have in your life, which is raising young children. And then the compulsion just arrives at the same time. And I'm curious of if you could share a bit more about the origins of that first work, and really what led you to make that happen while you were experiencing those very, I would call them intense times, as beautiful as they are. Raising young children, those pivotal years, can be very emotionally uh, consuming, right?
Sure, sure. I mean, it's a combination of things. So, I had this career in the late 90s in the burgeoning world of the internet. And it was fun and it was, remunerative. And so you have this identity in the world. And then when you have small children, that whole identity is stripped away. I wasn't making money when the kids were small. And so in a way, it feels like you have less to lose by writing. Like you're not giving up that
Yeah.
career and that identity. It's the place of having every part of your identity and even just your regular identity when you're with small kids all the time. It's all about them. So you're sort of stripped back to this very blank page place for yourself. And that really allowed me to do that. And so I think there was a sense of self that just wanted to come in and fill that gap in a way that didn't involve, the kind of risks that my parents were so, concerned about me taking because I'd already given some of those things up. So that was a part of it. And I do remember specifically, I had taken the kids to this water park and I went through the tunnel slide. Like you get in and you go through a tunnel and you shoot out. And it was probably one of the first times in several years that I didn't have a young person attached to my body. And it was right after that the voice woke up. So I think there was just something about that, like kind of reemerging as an individual person, even though, of course, in my daily life, I was immersed with them. But I also think the kind of things that you do with young children, there's so much repetition, right? So it's almost like everything's happening, but also like everything's just happening over and over again in almost a meditative way.
Yeah. There's a freedom in the repetition, right? As you would do any task from, from work or whatever, if you have some kind of repetitive job that allows a certain part of your mind to be liberated. And then on top of that, your inhibitions are down kind of, and it just allows you to move on to something that is more honest from yourself, I guess, to come
Yeah,
out. Yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah.
looking at the subject matter of your first novel versus what you're presenting now, your latest work, which is, just a wonderful read so far, can you share a bit about those contrasts of what happened in the first novel, what kind of learning experiences you had, and what allowed you to catapult into the next work, or if there was some time in between, if you could give us a sense of
Hmm.
that timeline of discovery from one book to the next.
Sure. So the first novel, Paper is White, is it's a contemporary novel set in the Bay Area in the late 90s, and it concerns a young woman who uh, decides to get married to her female partner. And that decision, because marriage was not legal for them, raises all these questions. If you can't have a legal recognized marriage, what does the marriage entail? And Ellen is simultaneously a recorder of the history of the Holocaust. She's an oral historian. And so, questions about storytelling and history and what is made public and what is private are high in her consciousness because, for many survivors of the Holocaust, a way that they survived was just not to talk about it. And then as they got later in their lives, they had often a moment of realization like, I need to tell this story now. So those two things overlap for her in this quest to figure out, what will be required of her. And also, it's a time when, people were not as open about their identity. And so, like the people that she works with, the elderly people, she's not out to them because she feels that that would be shocking to them and disruptive of her work with them. So she's really trying to figure out how she can do something like get married and also navigate this space of like privacy and secrecy. And her quest is complicated by the fact that she had a very close relationship with her grandmother who died without knowing
Mm,
that she was gay.
mm.
So, I mean, I think that in in certain ways, it may seem that the next novel, Forget I Told You This, which is also set in the Bay Area, but is about an artist at midlife who finds herself both desiring to be an artist in residence at the world's largest social media company and drawn into a plot against the world's largest social media company. In many ways, addresses the same concerns about the wish to be seen and also the wish for privacy and the face of, in Amy's case, data surveillance and big data. So I think in some ways, like they maybe feel like very different books. And I think Ellen and Amy are very different characters. But in some ways, I'm sort of working the same bone, which is this question about public and private identities.
Yeah, and it's an incredibly important question, especially considering our social media climate. And I
Mhm.
feel like I have this conversation every day with myself, with my wife, with my friends about how much is too much? How much of ourselves are we giving
Yeah.
to these platforms that are taking over our lives? Speaking of Google and other such entities. But can you tell me a bit about Amy Black, who's the protagonist of your latest work, and how she comes into the world? How do you flesh her out into the person that she became in the manuscript?
Wow, it's a great question, and I feel like it will all sound woo. I think
I love
actually,
that. Like, I just got to preface this. Like, when somebody goes woo woo, that's kind of my favorite area, but it's a challenge to try to articulate that. So I'll let you do the hard part.
sure, sure. So Amy, I mean, you asked about the gap between the novels, and I actually began Forget I Told You This during the attempt to get Papers White published. And I think it's no coincidence that Amy is a frustrated artist who feels like she might not ever get to be an artist in the world, right? So part of her desire is to be seen as an artist, to ply her trade as an artist. And her art is very antithetical to the world of social media and big data because she loves the art of the medieval manuscript and she wants to write love letters in this kind of style. So not super contemporary work and not an obvious fit for the world that we live in. So, you know, feeling my own frustrations about the process of publication, and let's just say it's a bad business. Writing is good, but the the business of writing, it just can be so hard. So, you know, there's some of my own frustrations packed into that. I do recall that I had this little notebook, another notebook that I was because I took the Tin House workshop with Jess Walter, who's just a lovely and generous writer. And he advised carrying around a notebook. So for a while, I was just jotting down ideas in this little notebook that, of course, when I started to write, I never looked at it ever again. But I think it was like a space where some version of Amy came to live. But then, like, I'm very much like a by the light of the headlights in the fog kind of a writer because I really enjoy the process of discovery. And so I learn things about a character as I'm writing a scene. I think that for me, like if I had it all plotted out, there would be no joy, sort of like you know, writing a restaurant review of a real restaurant. It would all be predetermined, and that's part of the writing process that I love so much is kind of seeing the bottom drop out, like you're in a scene and then suddenly there's like a place of discovery. And I think some of the best things about for me about my writing come that way, and I feel like it's an extended dream. um and
Mm,
I'm sort of like when I read back the novel, I was really pleased that things that come up in the beginning, like it all gets used. For me, that's really important,
Mhm.
not to have extraneous pieces, but like everything that happens gets used and it comes back and it all comes together. And it's amazing to me that that happens in large part through the unconscious process of creativity.
I absolutely adore that, because one of the surprising things is, as you read the work, and obviously you've gone back and you've polished and you've done this sort of thing, but the mystery feels very alive, very much in motion, and there's a confidence there to what is unfolding, even though it's keeping us on the edge of our seats. So it's not like we're, you know, just kind of meandering through a story. We're actually moving along with muscle toward a resolution. And that's something that I really enjoyed about the work. But I wanted to ask you about the process of excising things and shaping things into
Mm-hmm.
what eventually they became in
Mm-hmm.
your novel. But you mentioned in another podcast that you write a lot. You overwrite maybe
Mm.
sometimes. Is that
Yeah.
accurate? Or could you tell me how that plays
Yeah.
into your editing process?
Sure. Sure. Well, so I mean, for me, I have to love editing and I do enjoy it. And so that really helps. But my first novel, Papers White, it was like 379,000 words that
Hmm.
we know unless we're like George R. R. Martin, that's an unpublishable length.
Yeah.
And it was hard the first time to make the cuts because at that length, you have to cut out characters, you have to cut out plot lines. It's not just like, oh, let's take out all the adjectives. It's a lot more. Um, I joked to somebody recently because I have dogs and I love dogs, and I said, I always am putting dogs in and then having to take them out. Um, with Forget I Told You This, I think I clocked in around 179,000 words, and I was really trying to keep it much shorter, like under 100. And as I blew past that word count, I just had to tell myself, don't worry about it. Just keep going until you get to the end, and then you'll cut. And honestly, most of the cutting, so it's around 90,000 now. So, it's cutting half. Most of that cut was just painless. I mean, it takes multiple rounds, but it just wasn't that hard. It wasn't anywhere near as hard as the first book. Of course, what's left of the first book is one quarter of what I started with. And I'm working on a project now and I'm really trying to keep it under 100,000. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, but I think this kind of ties into what you're saying of the extended dream, which is a lovely phrase, and I'm going to steal and use for as long as I live, because it does feel like you have to just go into the dirt and keep sifting and sifting, and before you know it, you have another, tens of thousands of pages. But in your digressions, did you find something that was really, really pivotal to the character, to Amy in particular, in all of the stuff that you took out? Was there something that was really pivotal that maybe you had to find a way back in some other form?
Hmm.
Like if there's an example of that.
Um, I would say no. I don't think
Mm.
anything really essential came out. And you said in my digressions, I mean, they're all digressions, right? I
Yeah.
I remember when I was in high school, my senior English teacher, he had said, you have a Jamesian period, which just means like you write incredibly long sentences with lots of relative clauses and parentheticals and things. I'd say for this particular book, it they were more uh I mean, it's hard to even there's one particular edit that was challenging and it was significant, but I would say all the other the major cuts, they were just elaborations more than essential things. Like I did lose a dog. I am sorry to
Mm.
say the
Mm.
new project has a dog and the dog is essential and the dog will stay.
Mm.
But when I first so I worked with Zero Street Fiction, which is a new imprint of the University of Nebraska Press. It was created to give a trade audience for LGBTQ plus projects writers, and this is the inaugural title in the series. And so when it was selected, my editor Timothy Schaffert said we love the book and we just have some minor edits, and so we went through the process of contracting, and then I had my editorial meeting with Timothy, and he said, there's just this one thing. And then he named the pivotal uh, element of the plot that motivated Amy to make her big decision. And he said, I think this just is extraneous and you don't need it. And I had this panic, like, how am I going to get her to decide and do what she needs to do without this thing? And it's so important. And he and I went around batting around some ideas, and we exchanged some emails that weekend. And he was like, you could have an assassin, and there could be, and it was getting more outlandish by the second. And then it didn't take more than like a few days before I realized, like, oh, I can cut this out, and I can cut all evidence of this out and make her motivation much more intrinsic to her character. And it's better. And I just, at this point, I don't miss it, but that was a plot line that had to be torn out.
Yeah, and it always comes down to those difficult decisions that you feel are illuminating on the character, but really it takes an outside perspective to say, think about it a different way, make it clearer or cleaner, perhaps. It feels like that's what happened.
Yes, absolutely. And I have to say, I know it can be hard for writers to work with editors, and I've done plenty of freelance editing, and it's hard to hear things don't work, but there is such a pleasure in working with a good editor who really understands your vision for something and just helps to make it better. And if writers out there, take advantage of the opportunity to work with a good editor, of whoever's publishing you, and just really try to listen to them, because it can be such a nice work of collaboration. And I would say I had that experience too, working with Annalena Phillips Bell at Ecotone on a piece that they published. Just that sense of we're working together and we're making this its best incarnation, rather than like, these are my words and I must clutch them until my fingers curve into talons. But, having cut so much myself in advance, I think it's good preparation for being a little less precious, and having a little bit of thicker skin. And you just realize, like, you know what? This writing is good, but that is not the criterion for keeping it. It has to be good, and it has to also work with this project. And I think because, like, every time we write, at least for me, like, you write something good, you feel like, oh my God, I don't know if this will ever happen again. I have to hold on to this, but you really have to trust that it will happen again. And then if you did it once, you'll do it again, and it's really okay. And I like to share this little story about, I went to the Tin House Writers Workshop and the Sewanee Writers Workshop with Forget I Told You This. And, you come back from a writer's workshop with like a stack of copies of your manuscripts with everybody's comments on it. And, like, you can't write a manuscript by popular demand. You find the people whose voices resonate for you. But it's like, well, what do I do with all this? And I sheet mulched the backyard with the manuscripts. And it felt like it's a good metaphor, because you have to be able to let go of things in order to create your work. And so I feel that way about editing. Like, it can be hard, but like, it's okay to let it go. And it like, you really, if you have a font of creativity in you, like, you just have to trust that it really is there and it's not going to vanish away.
Trust yourself and love yourself enough to know that the compulsion won't go away. The drive to create something won't go away, and you don't have to hold on to this one in a precious manner. And I feel like I could ask you all kinds of questions about editing in particular, because that collaboration is so vital. And I just think that we could have like a whole episode on that alone. Yeah. But I want to ask you about this thing that you spoke about in another podcast about sort of the generational responsibility to further artistic output for a particular group of people. And you didn't say that, in like specific words or anything like that. This is just sort of my interpretation of maybe what you were saying. And perhaps you could sort of elaborate with me a little bit. Do we have to get some things out of our system as folks from an underrepresented community or do we have to continue sharing stories of our origin? I don't know if this makes sense exactly, but I just you lightly mentioned this in another interview, and I'm wondering if you could help me kind of parse through this idea, of yourself as an LGBT person. Do you feel there's a responsibility there, or are you opening up the canvas a little bit more in your own way? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I wish I could go back and remember what I said and what I was
Sorry.
thinking. I mean, I think as a queer writer, I feel like what's interesting to me is to be second wave or third wave in that
That's what it
I
was.
feel like
Okay.
it's less interesting to me to tell the coming out stories that really were important to me when I was a young queer person. But
Mm,
like I feel like, I don't it's such a weird thing, right? Because
yeah.
like Zero Street Fiction, it's an LGBTQ plus focus press and just came back from Nebraska where we had a panel talking about what that meant. And it's not 100% clear what that means, or what the requirements are. I feel like for me, having like what I think of, and I think Garth Greenwell may use this phrase too, like a homonormative lens. Like for me, I take it very much for granted that, say, Amy Black is a lesbian, and but that's not what the story's about. And I think, you also don't want to be like behind walls where people feel like I can't relate to this. And I don't think that's the experience people have of this book. I actually did a reading and a conversation with a good friend of mine who's a professor of cognitive science, and I invited him to be my interlocutor, and he was pretty tickled because he confessed that he'd always wanted to be like a radio show host. And I said, and of course he lives in Amherst, and I was like, and of course you'll want to invite like your friends to this reading because like I don't live in Amherst, I don't know a ton of people there. And he was like, well, I don't know if I know people who are the audience for this book. And I think really what he was saying is, I don't know a lot of lesbians. And I was like,
Mm,
well, I'm not, you're you're an academic. Like, I hope you know people who read and people who think about, say, issues like data privacy and issues like art and our endurance in the world through art. And it was really interesting to me that, he said that at the outset, and then he read the book, and he just had a very different understanding because, and I think this is just like, this is the lingering effects of prejudice, and I'm sure that you have experienced this too, is that people think like, oh, if the character is a lesbian, this is a quote unquote lesbian novel and it belongs in a certain section and it's for certain people, and it's like, well, I mean, this is a novel. I mean, I would say it's literary fiction, and that's probably the biggest delimiter of it of all, right? With a kind of thriller edge. But like that is so much more central. That it's a novel that it's fast paced, but it's a novel with a literary sensibility and an interest in the language and the style in which it's written, and also in thinking about things and not just having characters like running from one thing to the next thing. So in a way, it's like it's I don't want to say it's incidental that Amy is a lesbian, because I do think also there's like a queer sensibility, and I think there's a very strong Jewish sensibility in this novel that you might not think of in that way either. But I think, we bring our frames of reference and hopefully allow those to breathe in works that um, feel like they're not just about one note, I
right,
guess.
right. And I think at least in your setting up of this character and the situation, that was incredibly effective because when I read, writing from a person of color or somebody who's, Mexican American like myself, that's kind of like a signifier, right, of kind of where they're at in their journey of exploration. And for me, this work was so effective at sharing this human being in their entirety and not letting it be a statement about certain things, but it allowed you to really understand their humanity as they went into this other journey that was, maybe not 100% related to their identity. And I thought that was just a beautiful balance, because this was a fully fleshed out human being that I'm really enjoying their journey as they're trying to uncover something that is really larger than themselves, and it gets definitely quite intense. But if we could talk for a minute about the technology aspect of it, because with your proximity where you live, I can imagine that it might be a big shadow looming over your neck of the woods. Is that kind of accurate to say, when speaking of Silicon Valley and a lot of these places?
Well, it's interesting to be close to it. And also, as I said, I've worked in it, or at least adjacent to it. I think that it would be easy to think that I'm a Luddite or something, because I've written this novel that asks us to think about what does it mean that we like give our data to these giant technology companies, and we don't really know what's going to happen with that information. And I personally think it's not the technology, right? The technology is cool. I'm talking to you on a computer. I have a little mini computer that fits in my pocket. And I've always been interested in the technology. And like as a grad student at UC Berkeley, I was teaching literature courses that involved hypertext modalities, and I think it's really fascinating, and I think it can do a lot of good. And what is troubling is that we haven't decided as a society that we want to put safeguards in place, or that we want to regulate it, in fact, at all. um, and I think like we're seeing now, so, and I think like the world has felt safe enough to a lot of people that it's something we do without thinking, and it's not our fault. Like I don't feel like any individual person should be like wrapping themselves in tinfoil, although like maybe you want to use Mozilla Firefox and maybe you want to use DuckDuckGo, but I don't think it's anyone's fault for having like been carried along on this wave, because how really can you live without being involved in technology at this point? But I do think it's become more apparent how how not thinking about these things has created issues. For example, as suddenly it appears that Elon Musk has the status of a major world political figure because he controls all these satellites that are instrumental in providing Ukraine with internet during a major war. Like nobody elected him to do that, but also nobody thought about like, oh, what happens when all of these things are in the hands of one individual and we come to depend so heavily on them?
Mm,
I think there's lots of things like that. I mean,
yeah.
if you want to be afraid, like look at Palantir, which it's kind of um, Q. So in my novel, Q is the big social media company, and thank you, Elon, for changing Twitter to X, because it really is a good fit. But like Palantir is this. It's the biggest of the big data companies with predictive, trying to use data predictively for all kinds of things, including his product. So it's Peter Thiel, who is he's a bad gay. He was one of the founders of PayPal, and he's just a real right wing conservative. But Palantir is like scraping up all the data, and police departments use it, for example, to determine patterns of gang affiliation.
Mm,
Well, they're just not always right.
yeah.
These predictions, and they have powerful effects on people's lives. You hear about facial recognition technology. It's pretty crazy, and it is really bad with people of color. And Kashmir Hill just released a book all about Clearview AI. That's also used by police departments. Predictive technology is used in order, and is being sued by the ACLU for predicting and recommending paroles. And so, I mean, we're almost like in the world of future crime, right? Like, because we're not statistical things, we're human beings. So, anyways, and now, of course, after the Supreme Court's Dobbs decision, things that we say on social media, like communications that we make electronically, have compromised people who are talking about, Plan B pills in states where abortion is now illegal. Like, it's crazy. So I think, like, but I started writing this book in the Obama era, and it might have seemed like a tinfoil hat preoccupation, but things change quickly. And I think then you start, not that it wasn't a problem before, but you understand in a different way, like, oh, all this stuff, it's out there and you can't suck it back in. And who, as Shoshana Zuboff has written really extensively and thoughtfully about this topic, who decides who decides? Because her argument is that things that um, data acquisitions companies know about us will be used and are being used to shape our behavior without our knowledge or consent. Um, so it is, and she wrote the book on it, but she also wrote many shorter articles that you can read, so you don't have to read the 1,000-page book
Yeah, certainly
if
worth a
you're
look.
interested.
Yeah, absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely. And
yeah.
I'm curious of what your thoughts are, given that I believe you do the equity program with high school seniors, right? So you work with
Oh yeah,
folks from underserved communities, which is an amazing thing that you're
yeah,
doing. And I'm so grateful that there's folks like you doing that kind of work. But if you could give me a sense of perspective of what the younger generation feels about technology, because I get concerned as a parent, and I'm curious of what
yeah.
that lens is. How do they perceive the technology that surrounds them, that is part of who they are? But do you believe that they have a social responsibility, or that they understand that there is a need to be more careful on the internet? Just to get a that perspective, if you can tell what that is.
Well, well, I would like qualify this by saying, like, when I'm working with youth who are, in need of support, I work with them on their college essays, and
Hmm.
that's the equity
I
piece,
see.
is trying to give kids who don't have, a $10,000, $40,000 college counselor the support of somebody like myself, or one of our mentors is an editor for Mother Jones. Like, we have really smart people who I think in many cases are better at working on essays and personal statements than some of those highly paid folks. So that's not really a conversation that I have with those students. I mean, I'm a parent of a 19-year-old and a 22-year-old. So I have a little bit of a glimpse through their experiences. And I mean, my kids have never been really into social media. I know the New York Times did a little piece not that long ago about a group of kids who call themselves neo-Luddites. And I think that for kids, they can realize that it feels bad and it makes them feel bad when they're seeing their lives through these social media lenses. But I also think, like, a lot of kids spend a whole lot of time on platforms like TikTok. And I mean, gosh, even the United States government is concerned about TikTok. um, it's its servers are located in China, which is the most advanced surveillance society in the world. Um, there, I mean, and like, I mean, the word genocide has come up a lot lately, and I don't want to go there, except to say that the Muslim Uyghurs in China, are like social surveillance and DNA technology and facial recognition and voice recognition. Like, those technologies are being used to contain those people in very extraordinary ways. And so I think, like, it's concerning to think about the kinds of influence that can come through these platforms. And I think, lately, in the wake of the crisis in the Middle East, which is so historied and complex. Like we're seeing social media is this just like um, soapbox of very loud, partisan, extreme opinions that, they don't, I mean, I hate to say it, but they don't actually change what happens in the world, but they do create like intense animosities between people in a way that's deeply disturbing. And so, I think that there's Gen Z and what is comes after them?
I believe
Gen
it's
double
alpha.
A? Is it alpha? Okay,
I believe
wild.
so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know how those kids perceive it, but I think we as adults know that just the fact of using these technologies can be harmful to young people, and I feel grateful in a way that I grew up without it. Um, because I think it puts so much pressure on kids. So, and also it gives them access to completely different worlds, and makes them less alone. So again, I just think like, we have to decide how we want this all to fit into our lives. And I don't have easy answers. And I hope I didn't write a novel that suggests there's an easy answer. I hope I wrote a novel that asks questions, because I think that's the best thing we can do is to ask questions and to have conversations and to think about things instead of to be like preached to,
I
which is
couldn't agree more.
boring.
Yeah.
Boring.
I could not agree more. But I have a couple more questions here to be mindful of your time. But this has been such a pleasure. And I wanted to ask you, as you completed Forget I Told You This, now that it's going out into the world, what are the thoughts that you're left with personally, as just a human being in the world who's trying to improve on their craft? What are the feelings that you're left with, or questions, personal questions,
Um,
once you completed this
um,
work?
well, one of the questions I had, of course, is what will I do next, especially in the time before this novel found a publisher, because you never want to just be trying to sell a book. It's so hard. And it's important to remember that you're a creative person. I think for me, the what next question is also a question of how will I do something different, because I'm just not interested in writing the same book over and over. Um, and as I was reading the galleys, I was noticing like ways in which I might use the same kind of a syntax. And and that strikes me. And I have thought like, I want to break from that. I want to break from those patterns, and do something that's new. So in my current work, I'm working in a third person point of view instead of a first. I'm doing these short little chapters. I just want to keep doing things that are different and challenging. And as the book goes out, I think like how lucky to be able to have a book that goes out, because gosh, there are so many talented writers who just don't have that opportunity. And I'm just so grateful that I can do that. And I'm aware too, as you have a book come out, it's so much work to try to publicize it. And even with a press that has a publicity department, they don't have oodles and oodles of money like a big five kind of publisher. But I just am mindful of, even amidst some of the frustration where you feel like I need to be running around with a sandwich board, it has my book cover on it. I'm just mindful of experiences like the one you and I are having now, that having a book out there allows you to make individual connections with people. And that is a really powerful thing, even if it's not, 100,000 people, even if it's just one person at a time. It's a beautiful experience to be able to have that experience. And I want to say too, I'm just quelling here, just like gushing with pride. So, my son, who's a 19-year-old college sophomore, um, uh, turned out to be my cover designer. And so
Oh,
there's an extra layer of tremendous pride that I
oh
see,
my
that I
goodness.
feel when I see, like when the cover gets used in a review. I just feel like overflowing. And what a fantastic experience it was to work with him creatively. So, I mean, that's case study one of the power of connection. But
Yeah.
just having come from Nebraska too, and having met my publisher's team, like it's great. It's great to be able to to connect with people. And then, of course, when I hear from people and they say that they love the book, and, somebody said she just visited her son who was in his freshman year of college, and she was reading this passage in the novel where Amy compares the the time of being a parent with a child at home to a book of hours and just lists
Mm.
all the hours. And she said she just cried on the plane. And I think what a privilege to be able to move people. I mean, it's just an extraordinary thing. So I'm really grateful for that.
Oh my goodness. That, I was going to ask you a whole bunch of stuff, but that is a beautiful note to end on because you've encapsulated everything that is good about the work that you're doing. And I strongly urge folks to check out this work. Forget I Told You This is an awesome, unique techno-thriller. And you do have a midlife character who is really like checking all the boxes, but also breaking the boxes and doing her own thing. And it's such a delight to read, and I just can't wait to get to the end because this is going to be such a blast to get through the next couple pages here. But I can't thank you enough for your time, Hilary. This has been such a blast, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing. So I hope that we get to connect down the road because
I hope so too.
yeah.
And I'm really appreciative of the work that you do and your incredible thoughtfulness and your artistic sensibility, because you come to this as an artist yourself, and it really shows in the way that you approach writers and you approach their work, and I'm really thankful.
Oh, thank you so much. That means the world. But I will let you enjoy your Sunday, and I hope you have a wonderful time. So let's talk real soon, okay? Let me know when the next
Okay.
one's around, and I'll be here for you.
All right. Thank you so much, Jaime. So nice to meet you.
Wonderful to meet you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.